Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 162. A Conscious Decision to Trust. Izuku ended up staying the night over at the Shinso's house. Shota mused that it was probably for the best. The two of them had spent the whole night trying to figure out what the hell they were supposed to do. He wasn't used to seeing Hisashi so uncertain about things like this, so he was glad that Shinso-san had offered out a hand. There wasn't much they could tell her, but Hisashi had said there were probably some universal truths she could offer regardless of specifics. Even if she didn't, it wouldn't hurt to try. They both had full confidence in her when it came to Izuku. She'd proven time and time again that she wanted the best for him just as much as they did. Neither of them slept particularly well, but it was a far cry from how piss-poor last night had gone. They were both sitting at the table, silently drinking coffee, when Izuku walked through the front door. The parallel that drew with yesterday's fiasco didn't go unnoticed. "Hey, kiddo!" Hisashi called out. Izuku's footsteps were silent, so Shota didn't know what was happening until he peeked out from around the corner and paused between the living room and dining room. "Hi," Izuku replied quietly from where he stood at the far end of the table. All three of them sent questioning glances at one another, and, to Shota's surprise, Izuku walked over and took his spot across from Hisashi. He didn't say anything, but he was chewing at his lip like he was about to. "I'm sorry about, well, everything," Izuku spoke up after a moment. Hisashi's mouth was already open and a denial was no doubt on the tip of his tongue, but Izuku interrupted him. "No, don't want. I shouted at you. I broke the wall. I lied to you. Even after everything that you've done for me, and I put you both in danger. It doesn't matter if it's not fair to me. It's not fair to you either. And I'm sorry," Izuku stated with determination. He couldn't help the swell of pride he felt, both because Izuku had the confidence to cut Hisashi off, and because that was such a well-thought-out and mature apology. He saw Hisashi's empathy in Izuku, and he was working on that emotional maturity. He had the foundations at the very least. For someone who wasn't their kid, he saw the best of both of them in him. "All right, let's take that from the bottom to the top. You're right, it's not fair to anyone, but it is what it is. Apology accepted and forgiven. As for putting us in danger, you already saved Sho's life. I never got to properly thank you for that. I much prefer the potential danger we're in now to the alternative where you never stepped foot into our lives. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you." Hisashi's hand had begun to subtly shake around the grip of his coffee mug as he spoke, so Shota reached his hand out and covered theirs with his own. They shot him a grateful smile before continuing. "As for what we've done for you, it's what you deserve. Regardless of anything you've done or any lies you've told, every kid deserves a safe, comfortable home. And we are more than happy to provide that for you. Sho's been dying to hole you away somewhere safe since the moment he met you anyways." They poked. He couldn't help but roll his eyes at that. Hisashi had a flair for the dramatics, but, well, he wasn't wrong. See, he's not even denying it. "Besides, I always wanted a family, and that's what you are to us, kiddo. Your family. Whether you believe it or not, it's the truth," they explained earnestly. Izuku's eyes were glassy, and he had his lip pinched tightly between his teeth. He turned his gaze down to the table in a vain attempt to hide the hand that met his face to wipe away the tears. He stayed like that for a while, long enough that Hisashi looked like he was about to say something, but Shota stopped them. The kid needed a minute to process that. Hisashi came from a very loving family, one that expressed that love freely and often. He didn't understand what it was like to go from an emotionless void to suddenly being a part of something, suddenly being surrounded by people who cared about you. Shota's parents never cared for him. He knew that. They were always far too involved in each other and their careers to give a shit about him. They had given him everything he needed and nothing more. They didn't dote. They didn't coddle him. They gave him food, shelter, enough spending money for him to figure out how to raise himself, and that was it. Going from that to UA, where every loudmouth bleeding heart on campus seemed to want to be his best friend, was jarring. And it had taken him a while to adjust. Izuku wasn't so dissimilar to him in that way. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red, but they had a determined edge to them. Hitoshi calls me Izuku now. You called me that yesterday. You can if you want to. I don't mind if you do. Izuku stuttered out, offering the shakiest metaphorical hand for them to hold on to. Oh, thank God. Shota knew that he had slipped up more than a few times calling him Izuku. He didn't like calling him Midoriya, though that seemed to bother him more than it bothered Izuku. He glanced over to Hisashi, who had a smile splitting their face, the kind that was far too genuine to not be infectious. Needless to say, he found himself smiling too. It wasn't a huge leap, but it was a step in the right direction. Nedzu had grown used to the feeling of others being cross with him. In his youth, it was the scientists who blamed him for their experiments not yielding the results they had desired. Later, after he had gained his own autonomy, he had found himself in the habit of upsetting humans constantly. They were strange and foreign to him, though with enough study and careful dancing around conversations, he had grown to understand the ways their brains functioned differently to his, which made working with them much less grating for everyone involved. Nowadays, if someone wasn't sending him snide emails or a disapproving glance at the very least, he would consider that a failure in his work ethic. After all, very little changes if everyone is comfortable. Thankfully, the opportunity for such an occurrence rarely arose with the school board in near constant contact with him. Today, he had two people rather cross with him, and work hours hadn't even begun. Unfortunately, he preferred to upset those higher up on the chain of command, not lower. Having your employees upset with you tended to be a poor reflection of oneself. Naturally, he was looking forward to his next meeting being done quickly. Good morning, gentlemen, Nedzu greeted them. Neither Aizawa nor Yamada responded. They just stared back at him with very dissatisfied looks in their eyes. I believe apologies are in order. I will not lie to you. I would do what I did again. I do not have remorse for my actions, as I didn't have any better option. At least not one that I could see. Everyone involved is put into a difficult situation by nature of even knowing, as I'm sure you understand. But I do deeply regret damaging our trust, regardless of my perceived necessity. It is not something I did lightly, he explained honestly, as false remorse would do very little to repair trust. The barest twitch of an expression passed over Aizawa's face, and it looked far too close to disgust for his taste. Yamada, however, looked resigned. The latter was far more logical when it came to emotions, despite Aizawa's naturally more reasonable disposition. When he was moved to such irrationalities as feelings, he was far less quick to forgive. Nedzu had expected this. I presume that you have questions. He opened the conversation. Do you trust him? Yagi, do you trust him? He was surprised to hear Aizawa speak up first. I trust him implicitly with many things, and less so with others. You'll have to be more specific. With Izuku. Aizawa bit out sharply. I trust his intentions. I trust that he would do anything for that boy. He would protect him with his dying breath. I am certain of that, he answered. But, Aizawa prompted, I trust him to handle the boy's fragile mental state about as much as I would trust myself. he admitted. They both scoffed out a bitter laugh at his response. Which isn't to say not at all, he argued, but certainly not the best choice among the ones we have available to us. The two of them looked at each other in a way that communicated something he wasn't privy to before they looked back, and Yamada spoke up. If you have any other secrets, now's the time for 'em, they said, threat evident in their tone. No, no more secrets, none that pertain to you or your charge, at least, he answered honestly. If that's another lie, I promise you that I will have quite a few nasty things to say very publicly about your management of UA, whether they're true or not. I know how to stir up a nasty scandal by this point, they said with a smile sharp enough to rival his own. Perhaps Yamada was less rational about this than he had hoped. That wouldn't be very wise for your career, he pointed out. Mutually assured destruction, they answered easily. He did not doubt the sincerity of that threat for a moment. Noted. I assure you, all cards are on the table, he reiterated. They shared another glance and had a silent debate as to whether or not they were going to believe him. Thankfully, it appeared that the argument ended in his favor. How are we going to keep him safe? What's your plan? Aizawa asked. I hardly think there's a safer place for him than here at UA and with you too, barring keeping him hidden away completely, though I think his growth has been hindered by circumstance enough at this point. So this was all your plan the whole time? You knew from the beginning? Aizawa pressed, mounting fury evident. No, I wasn't lying when I told you Midoriya is dangerously intelligent. He had been coming here to train with Yagi under Shuzenji's watch for a month before he even got accepted into UA. He flew under my radar for far longer than I'm comfortable with. I assure you, his current lodgings are a happy accident. If I had known how he was living, I would not have let it continue. He corrected Aizawa's accusation. The explanation seemed to have settled him slightly, but a nasty scowl remained plastered on his face. Now, I suppose this isn't the most tactful time for this conversation, but it is the only time we have available. We are meeting to discuss the matchups for the practical final during lunch today. No, Aizawa interrupted him before he could even finish his sentence. I will heed your decision, but I would like for you to hear me out first, he requested. Yamada shot a confused look over to his partner. He wants to put Izuku and Bakugo against All Might for the final, Aizawa explained. Yamada cringed, but he didn't say anything, so he took that as permission to proceed. You no doubt care little for my first point, so I'll get it out of the way. I don't believe Bakugo would work with Midoriya unless suitably motivated, and I doubt he will view anyone else as big enough of a threat to prompt cooperation. I sincerely believe pitting him against All Might is the only way he has a chance of passing your test. Furthermore, I think this falling out is the perfect recipe for Midoriya's success. Yagi, though I haven't spoken much to him, is rather distressed about the situation, and I find it unlikely that he will be able to face Midoriya head-on due to his emotional hang-ups. I'm sure Midoriya will notice his hesitance, and I think it would be good for him. He has All Might up on a pedestal. Seeing him uncertain and faltering should help that. Moreover, with your concerns about Midoriya's safety during the test, I don't believe we have anyone more suited and motivated to make sure that no one raises a hand against him with malice. He is the #1 hero for a multitude of reasons, and I am confident he will employ all of those to make sure Bakugo doesn't get the chance to lay a finger on his teammate, he explained. He let the contemplative silence stew for a moment before he spoke again. Logic aside, I know your anger is running high at the moment, and putting Yagi in this situation will be uncomfortable for him, I'm sure, he added with a sly grin. The contemplative glance that the two of them shared was enough for him to know his argument had landed. A mixture of logic and petty revenge was too tempting for most humans to pass up, which isn't to say that he was above that himself. No, he was unfortunately much worse. He only required one of those ingredients to win him over, and more often than not, it was the latter, not the former. The pair, again, was having a silent conversation, and it seemed as though Yamada was arguing in his favor. A surprising turn of events, but not one he would begrudge. He's not going to accept he was wronged if he doesn't see All Might was flawed. Yamada spoke up when words became necessary. Aizawa's responding look of angry resignation sealed the deal. Brilliant! Toshinori had spent the better part of the weekend sulking. There wasn't really a better word for it. He had cried more in the last 48 hours than he had the rest of his life combined, perhaps barring when he was an infant. Guilt hung heavy on his shoulders, and every second he felt like it would be the last he could stand before it crushed him. Of course, life went on regardless. Monday rolled around, and he had to face the music. He forced himself through all of the routines he had neglected over the weekend because he had to be functional for the students. He stretched, took his meds, and pretended like it didn't hurt to move even the slightest amount. He put on his oversized suit and drove to UA like he did every weekday. Unlike every other weekday, Aizawa glared at him with enough vitriol that he felt like he should be feeling physical effects from it. Yamada ignored him for the most part, but he caught their eye once or twice, and it wasn't pleasant either time. The day ticked by slowly, but he managed to get a glimpse of Midoriya. He didn't look any different than he normally did. The sight put him at ease for a moment before his internal dialogue helped remind him that he had seen the boy when he was willing to throw himself off of a roof. So just because he appeared to be doing well didn't mean he was. He quite desperately wanted to spend his lunch break in a disused room and return to the catatonic state he had been in for the past few days, but Nedzu had called for a meeting. It was probably for the best. He didn't fully trust himself to be able to escape from whatever mood he would have allowed himself to sink into. Regardless of his mood, this meeting had been scheduled for a week. They were going to be discussing the first year's finals. Being so new at this, he didn't feel like he had much input to give, but he needed to sit in and listen to what the people who actually knew what they were doing said. He sat and dutifully paid attention to the conversation and didn't disagree with anyone's assessments. The thought did cross his mind that this was something Midoriya would be very good at, analyzing the pool of participants and their quirks and assigning matchups. It wasn't until he heard his own name that he realized he might not have been paying as much attention as he thought he was. Obviously, he was going up against a pair of students. He wouldn't be in this meeting if he wasn't. All Might against Bakugo and Midoriya, he heard Nedzu announce, and he felt his face blanch. Everyone was looking at him now, and he couldn't help the way his gaze flicked toward Aizawa and Yamada. Did they approve this? They weren't arguing about it, and he couldn't imagine they would be so quiet if this were the first they were hearing about this matchup. Yes, I suppose if I'm going against anyone, it would make sense for it to be those two. He forced out an answer with a practiced fake laugh. He saw a few of his colleagues laugh along with him and was glad to know that he wasn't so out of it as to flag their notice. He'll admit that the rest of the meeting went by in a blur. Why would they allow him to go against Midoriya? Yamada had forbade him from even speaking to the boy, which he couldn't blame them for. He couldn't help but feel like this was just as much a test for him as it was for the students, and he was racking his brain to try and figure out what it was they wanted from him. It hadn't escaped Izuku's notice how intently Todoroki had been watching him all morning. The last time they spoke, Izuku stormed off and left Hitoshi and Uraraka to do damage control. He knew they were all concerned about him. He wished they weren't, but for better or worse, they seemed to genuinely care about him. He had made the decision last Saturday to trust his new family, and no one could ever accuse him of doing things by half measures, so he was going to talk to them today, at least a little bit. He waited nervously as everyone settled into their spots at the lunch table. He could tell that the tension he had created last Friday still hung heavy between them, and ignoring it wasn't going to make it go away, at least not as quickly as addressing it would. I'm sorry for last Friday. I shouldn't have stormed out like that. I have a lot going on lately, he prefaced, hoping to test the waters for whether or not they were ready for the heavily censored version of the shit show that was his past. Like what? Todoroki asked when no one else spoke up. Todoroki, I told you, he doesn't have to. No, I think it would be better if I did, he interrupted Hitoshi, trying to tell Todoroki off. He looked around at the four of them, waiting for someone to say they didn't want to hear about it. But they didn't. They were all waiting patiently to hear what he had to say. No time like the present. He took a deep and shaky breath and spit the words out before he could back down. My mom has been out of the picture for a while, and my dad died. I'm living with a foster family now, he explained. It was a half-truth, but that was all he could afford to extend to them. They all looked surprised at his admission, Hitoshi included. He was glad to see a bit of the tension in Todoroki's shoulders ease at the news, but even still, Uraraka was the first to recover her wits enough to respond. I'm so sorry for your No, don't. He cut her off, regretting it immediately. Sorry, I just don't. He's not worth condolences. Neither of them are. Oh, she responded with morose understanding. Todoroki already knew that his home life had been less than favorable, hence why he had been watching him so intently, but it took Ida a moment to realize the meaning behind what he had just said. Was that why you were gone? Before the internships, you were... Ida trailed off. Yeah, that was when I moved in with the, that's when I moved, he answered awkwardly. He could see the guilt building behind Ida's eyes. He looked like he was about to apologize again, which would prompt too many questions from the two people at the table who were not in attendance for their little legal fiasco. So Izuku shot him a look that said, "Can it?" Ida pressed his mouth into a firm line, glanced at Hitoshi and Uraraka, and nodded. He did his best to shoot Ida another look that said, "It's fine," but that was a more complicated sentiment to communicate than "shut the hell up" was. But Shinso said he talked to your dad about your birthday cake. Todoroki pointed out, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. That was probably my foster dad, he replied with a grimace. Eraser sure as hell was not his dad. He was... Well, Izuku didn't know what he was, but trying to pin the label father next to his name kind of made him want to puke, if he was being honest. Saying the same thing about Mike was less nauseating, but not by much. They weren't his parents. That was gross. Guardians? Technically, yes, but parents? No. Do you like them? Your foster family? Uraraka picked the conversation back up. Yeah, they're... He trailed off and did his best to suppress the stupid grin on his face as he let his gaze drop to the bento Mike had packed for him. They're nice. That's good. So things are on the up and up then, right? She asked hopefully. Yeah, I guess they are, he replied, slightly in awe of how much he meant it. Sure, he had the threat of a supervillain breathing down his neck, but there was always something to worry about. For the first time in a long time, it felt like the pros outweighed the cons in his life. Do you have any siblings now? Ida asked a little awkwardly. Oh, no, not unless you count cats, he answered. Ooh, cats? Plural? Do you have any pictures? Uraraka chimed in. No, I don't. I'll try to get some tonight. How many are there? Hitoshi asked. Yeah, and what are their names? Uraraka asked excitedly. He snorted out a laugh at that and glanced at Hitoshi before answering. Kimchi and, bastard, he replied with a smirk. As he had expected, Hitoshi was laughing a lot more than anyone else, as he was the only one who knew who the cats belonged to. Finding out that your strict, no-nonsense teacher owned a cat named Bastard was, admittedly, kind of funny. What did the cat do to be named Bastard? Hitoshi asked through laughter. Attempted murder, mainly, he answered through his own giggles. He likes to lay on people's faces while they sleep, he explained when everyone at the table pulled a confused face. At this point, he should have known himself well enough to know that he shouldn't have let himself laugh like that. Not when he was discussing something so, emotionally charged, because the laughter quickly turned to tears when he realized that this was probably the first time he had ever voluntarily talked about his home life in 12 years. It was, at the very least, the first time he had talked about it in a positive light. No one at the table was laughing now, and he felt a rush of shame for being the reason for that. Sorry, it's okay. I'm just happy? I think. He tried to explain, but he wasn't really sure himself. Everyone was looking at him with discomfort and confusion, but Uraraka's expression crumpled into a sad smile before she stood up from her seat, walked around the table, and bodily shoved Hitoshi from his spot next to Izuku so that she could sit down and hug him. Hitoshi was on the floor complaining, Izuku was laughing again, and it was nice, he decided. This was nice. What the frick is going on with Deku? Katsuki wondered. What the frick is going on with Deku? Katsuki wondered as he watched Pink Cheeks shove Troll Doll to the floor so that she could hug Deku, who was laughing and crying at the same time in the middle of the cafeteria like a freaking psycho. Oh, whoa! What's going on over there with Mito? Pikachu asked after following his gaze. How the frick am I supposed to know? He bit back. He's been through the ringer lately. He was in the middle of the USJ, and then he was in Hosu too, right? Poor guy, Raccoon Eyes answered. And he's having a heart-to-heart with his friends about it? So manly, Shitty Hair added with an approving head nod. Do you guys think he ran into the hero killer with Endeavor? I talked to Roki, and he said all three of them ended up in the hospital. Ida has that gash on his shoulder, and Roki has 2 on his arm and 1 in his leg. I saw them in the locker room. Tape Face wondered aloud. Pervert? Pikachu taunted in response. Jeez, they were all insufferable. It's not perverted, I just have working eyes, and I'm not brain dead. Tape Face defended himself. Wait, really? What about Mito? Raccoon Eyes locked in on the gossip. Frickin' typical. Mito always changes in the stall, Pikachu answered. Why do you know that? You looking to peep or something, pervert? Tape Face shot back in a mocking tone. Will you guys shut the hell up? He barked at them. You're the one who started it, Pikachu argued. By looking in a direction? He asked incredulously. By peeping on their manly heart-to-heart, he mocked Shitty Hair. Maybe Bakugo's the Pikachu's almost insult was cut off by a murderous glare and a smoking palm nearly igniting the chopsticks in his hand. Anyway, nice weather we've been having, am I right? Pikachu wisely changed the subject. He let their inane chatter fade to background noise again and tried to sort out what was going on with Deku for the 1000th time since the semester started. He ran through the short list of things he knew for certain. Deku had a quirk now. Always had a quirk? The hag gave up trying to contact Auntie years ago. Did Auntie stop talking to them because of what he did to Deku? Hobo-sensei wasn't expelling him. For now. And that was pretty much it. He'd be tempted to say screw it and demand that Deku give him some damn answers if it weren't for the caveat to his final bullet point. Hobo-sensei had been glaring at him with that freaking creepy-ass stare for weeks, and now it was crystal freaking clear that the only reason he was still here was not because of his teacher's good grace. He could only guess what the reason was, and poking around trying to figure out its origin was liable to make the whole thing fall apart. He needed to be in this stupid frickin' school more than he needed answers. So, begrudgingly, he let Deku be. The waterworks in the middle of lunch ruined the mysterious tough guy routine he was trying to play anyway. Regardless of whether he ignored Deku or not, he had a feeling that things were getting close to a boiling point. He was not looking forward to the outcome of that. End of chapter.